Hi, my name is Madison, and I chose to do my missionary presentation on Scudder, and I read the book called Healing Bodies and Touching Hearts by Janet and Geoff Binge. And it highlights the life of Scudder, who was a missionary in India. So to begin, Scudder was born in the year of 1870. She was born in India, and she was born as the sixth child and the only daughter to her Irish family who lived in India as missionaries. Her family for legacies had been missionaries. Her grandfather was a missionary, and now her father and her mother were missionaries, and her aunt and uncle had been missionaries in India. And so she had a great legacy of missionaries in her family. And her father was a doctor in one of the poorest sections of India where famine and poverty were very prevalent. And for this reason, Scudder really began to hate the country of India, and she didn't really know why God had led them to India, and she was just very confused at why all of the children in India were dying of hunger, and she had plenty to eat. And so the images of the starving children and the dying people of India really left a lasting impact on her, and this led her to begin to hate where she lived and hate India. And one of these instances that really led Ida to really put it in foundation that she never wanted to be a missionary in India was when her mother gave her the task of feeding hundreds of children in the backyard of Dr. Scudder's clinic. And her mother delegated the task to her, and she told her, you can be in charge of feeding the children, give them one chunk of bread each. That's all they can have. Can you do that? 6-year-old Ida nodded, though in truth she was very confused. And so Ida did not know why her mother was putting her in charge of feeding the children, and why the children could only have one chunk of bread when Ida could have as much as she wanted to. And so from then on, she kind of declared to everybody except her parents that she would never be a missionary in India or a missionary at all. So about that time, her father got very ill from just the conditions of living in India, and they had been missionaries there for over 16 years, and so all of the tropical diseases were wearing on his body, so they had to go back to the United States on a furlough to allow time for him to get well. And so as they went back, Ida began to reflect on her time and just her life in India, and which increased her almost hatred for India and the images that were left in her mind. She had never even been to America, and this was her first time coming to America because she was born in southern India and lived there throughout the duration of the 7 years that she was alive. And so she was very eager to see what it would be like in the United States. And when she arrived in America, she was very excited to see that there wasn't any suffering or poverty, and that people had plenty of things to eat. And so Ida had never been to the country of America by the age of 7 years old. So the thought of her going home to a place that she had never visited left her inquisitive of what it would entail. Ida concluded that America, after living there for a little bit, was way better than India, where she had lived for her entire life. She saw that America did not have the same kind of suffering and poverty that India had. And if the starving children were not in Ida's view, then Ida technically was not responsible for their well-being or saving them. And so then she decided that she would never live in India again or step foot back in India. So her family told her that when her father's health got better, that they would return back to India to live. And so Ida really struggled with her father and her mother, the thought of them going back to India. And so about 2 years after being in America, her father's health had been getting better and better, and so her father's health had vastly increased, and so that they were going to go back to India. And the plan was her father was going to go first, and then her mother would join him in about 2 years if everything went as planned. Ida, for the 2 years that her father was gone, she missed him a lot and didn't understand why he had sacrificed so much in order to be a missionary in India. And so then it came time for her mother to join her father in India, and this brought Ida a lot of depression. And she had never even been away from her mother for more than a night. And she couldn't even accompany her mother to the train station because of the bad weather. And so she had to watch her mother through her bedroom window. And this is a quote from the book. It says, "Instead, Ida was left to watch through the upstairs window as her mother disappeared from view in a carriage. When the carriage was out of sight, Ida flung herself onto the bed and wept into her mother's pillow. The smell of her mother's perfume on it only increased the sadness." And I thought this was really, really sad because of, just because she had not been without her mother. And this young girl was having to say goodbye to her mother, and she didn't even know when the next time she was going to get to see her was. Ida was only 12 years at the time, and so then she stayed behind with her aunt and uncle who lived in Chicago. But then all the talk about her parents returning to India made her uncle, who had been a missionary previously, and made something stir inside of him, and so the uncle and the aunt also went to be missionaries in India. So then Ida was basically left homeless, and she felt like everyone had abandoned her and nobody had wanted her. She was very lonely. And so she went to a boarding school / seminary to live, and when she got there, she was very excited that she got to be around all of these girls that were her age. She had never got to do that before. She was the only girl of her entire family. So then she made up her mind that she was going to enjoy school. So at the boarding school, she was kind of known as a prankster. She would pull pranks on her classmates and her teachers. She would try to make others laugh to cover up the sadness that dwelled deep within her. She became quite a troublemaker also, and a distraction to the other girls. With each passing year, Ida got older and older, and then it was time for her stepping out party. And a stepping out party was basically a party that the parents threw for their daughters, and usually a marriage proposal would occur after. And since Ida did not have any parents in the United States, she didn't have anybody to sponsor and pay for her stepping out party. But she was still hopeful that everything would work out and she would meet some rich guy to marry. But she continued to receive letters while she was finishing up her last year at seminary, and they would tell of the ministry that was happening in India and what they were doing there. And her parents, all of this time, had just assumed that when she finished school, she would return to India and be a missionary. But Ida could not bear to tell them that she would never be returning there. One day, Ida received a telegram from her father saying that her mother was quite ill and she needed to go back to India to be with her. Ida, her love for her mother was too great than her desire not to go back to India, so she ended up going back. But she said that she would only spend 1 year in India, and then she would come back to the United States to start her life. And this is a quote also from the book. It says, this is her, Ida, telling one of her friends this, and she says, so don't any of you say I will be a missionary, because I won't, never, ever, ever. So when she returned to India, her father made the remark that she was almost 20 years old and that he felt like he missed Ida's entire childhood. And this made Ida very, very angry because she didn't understand why her family had sacrificed so much to be missionaries in India. And by sacrificing all of this, they kind of broke up their family and they weren't able to see each other throughout Ida's childhood and the other children's childhood. Ida had missed her mother very much, and she was very happy to see her again. But it also made Ida feel very self-conscious when she was back in India. She felt like she didn't know who she really was, and she was just very insecure about what she wanted to do with her life, and she felt like she was keeping a really big secret from her family because she didn't want to be there. And so Ida just kind of repressed these thoughts into the back of her mind. And then her mother's health began to improve months after Ida returned back to India. And so then Ida began visiting the local women, and it says about 10% of the families were Muslim and 90% were Hindu. And when Ida would go out and help these women, her cousin, who was her aunt and uncle that she had lived with, daughter, her cousin Dixie would come and help her. And Dixie just had very evident passion for what she was doing. And there was one part in the book where Ida said, "Do you not have any dreams of your own?" And Ida asked her, like, "Do you just do what your father tells you, or do you want to do this?" And Dixie replied with, "Yes, if I had it my way, my dream would be to just help the women and babies of India." And Ida was very confused about this, and she didn't understand why she wanted to follow in her family's footsteps of being a missionary in India. One day, Annie, Ida's friend, wrote from back at the seminary. Annie wrote Ida and expressed how jealous Annie was of Ida getting to be a missionary in India. And so while Ida was writing a letter back to her friend from boarding school about her life in India and how much she wanted to come back to the United States and never be a missionary, she was interrupted by a Brahmin man who knocked on her window. And his wife was 14 years old and having her first baby. The woman was having trouble delivering the baby and wanted to see if Ida could help. And Ida exclaimed to the man that her father was the doctor and she knew no medical knowledge, but her father could help her. And so she went and got her father, and her father talked to the Brahmin man, and the Brahmin man said, "No, it has to be Ida that can help me, because no man can defile my woman, my wife." And this led Ida to be very, and so Ida began to write her letter back to Annie, and just again stating how she didn't want to become a missionary in India because the people were so selfish to let their wives die with their newborn babies. And so then while she was replying to Annie, she got another knock at the door, and it was a Muslim man and with the same problem. And his wife was going to die with their newborn baby while she was in labor. And so Ida again got her father, and her father went and talked to the Muslim man, and the Muslim man said, "No, it must be Ida." And he said, "If it's the will of Allah to let my wife die, then it's the will of Allah." And so Ida was very, very upset about this. And she had a conversation with her father, and her father had said, just this is what happens every day, and you just have to kind of forget about it because it's their culture. And Ida really didn't understand this, and so she just kind of repressed those thoughts. And so she went back to writing her letter, and once again there was another knock at the door. And she knew the man this time, and she thought she could talk some sense into him, but he again denied the request of the father coming to help. And this left Ida very, very distraught. And so the next morning she just lied in bed, dreaming about returning to America where there was no suffering. And a quote from the book says, Ida stayed in her bedroom for a long time, sitting on the bed thinking about all of the things that as late as yesterday had seemed important to her. Now they seemed silly and useless. What was the point of spending her time deciding between a satin skirt and a velvet dress, or between a lace bonnet and a glittering hair clasp? What she was going back to America for? Was she going back to live a life full of trivial moments? Suddenly, Ida heard herself praying out aloud. God, if you want me to, I will spend the rest of my life in India trying to help these women. And just like that, overnight, God had called Ida to live a life serving him for his ultimate glory in the country of India for the rest of her life. And she had despised India the day before. And so this showed just how powerful the call of God was over her life. And just like that, instead of feeling just like she threw her perfect life away that she had back in America, she felt invigorated that she would get to serve God for the rest of her life. So she rushed to tell her parents that God had revealed her plan to her. And so Ida told her father that when her mother got completely well, that she was going to go back to the United States to study medicine and come back to India to care for the babies and the women. Ida started her degree to be a doctor in 1896, and she attended the Women's Medical College of Philadelphia. And after attending that college, she found out soon that the Northfield Seminary that she had gone to in high school did not provide her for a good foundation for medical school. And so when her family got together for the last time that they would be able to in about 4 years until she finished medical school, she got news that Cornell University in New York City had received an endowment with the stipulation that they accept women into the medical program. And so then Ida then transferred to Cornell in New York, and she hoped that this program at Cornell would provide a better foundation for tropical diseases that would be in India. But it was made known to her that in order for Ida to set sail back in India, that she would be responsible for raising $8,000 to help build and supply the hospital that she would be working at. One day, a man by the name of Mr. Shell came by and blessed her with a $10,000 check in memory of his wife who had a passion for medicine in foreign lands. And so after Dr. Ida returned back to India, in 1902, the 40-bed hospital opened in Vellore, India. It was named the Mary Tabor Shell Memorial Hospital in honor of the donation that Mr. Shell had made in honor of his wife. And also Annie, the girl that Ida had written the letters to while the men were knocking at Ida's door, had come to be her assistant. Dr. Ida also hired 6 women to bring with her to India to make a difference in the lives of women in India. Ida established roadside clinics and even a women's Christian medical center in Vellore. She remained very passionate about the ministry and passionate about caring for the women and babies, and most importantly, passionate about spreading the gospel all throughout India. And then after marking 60 years of missions in India in 1906, she was due to celebrate her 90th birthday. A big celebration was planned by the city, but right before the big event, Ida was doing her normal morning routine when she felt dizzy, and she knew that that was probably her time to go, and she was okay with everything that she had accomplished for the glory of God. And so on May 24th, 1960, Ida was pronounced dead. And an Indian man who was the superintendent at the hospital gave a eulogy later that day for Ida, and this was his eulogy. Only those who can see the invisible can achieve the impossible, he said, with tears streaming down his face. Dr. Ida Scudder has achieved the impossible through her close touch with the invisible God through her faith. And she was buried into the Indian soil that many years before she had said that she would never step foot back on. But it was on this soil that she impacted not only the women and babies, but all people all throughout the world. She healed many by being obedient to the call of God that he had placed on her life. And that was my presentation.